Recently, you've written on atheism as the Anglo ideology. How has this ideology come to dominate the world since World War II?
There was a kind of intellectual craze about 10 years ago. It was called the New Atheism. And there were four guys basically who were responsible for it. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris. They all wrote books about atheism. If you read the books, you realize what they all have in common is Darwinism. And Darwinism is basically, I'd say, the philosophical foundation of the Anglo-American ideology. If I've said this before, but when my son went to Harvard, we didn't have a clue about what Harvard was about. But he actually went there because the crew coach made a pitch for him. And so, yeah, why not row while you're studying? So they had a great crew team. So he went there and rowed. But what happens there is you get invited to join a club. And the clubs are the secret to what goes on at Harvard. It's like Skull and Bones is the elite club at Yale, and the Porcellian is the elite club at Harvard. So he gets invited to lunch. And the first question they asked him is, what do you think of Darwin? And he gave the wrong answer, and that ended his career as a budding master of the universe. That was it. But it is the ideology of the ruling class. It is the ideology, and it does lead. It is basically a justification for atheism. Darwin couldn't say that because he would have been run out of town on a rail in England in the middle of the 19th century when he wrote his book. But it's implicitly there. Basically, you have the universe is basically the self-regulating system. It's paganism. There's no question about it. It's a modern form of paganism. It got its start in England when with Newtonian physics, when Newton basically took Empedocles. Empedocles said that the world was composed of love and strife. And Newton was an alchemist. He was heavily involved in all of those experiments in his apartment. It probably drove him crazy because he was boiling lead in his apartment in beakers. So he went crazy for a while. But he took these terms. He knew he couldn't promote magic anymore. Magic was over. The John Dee form of magic that was popular under Elizabeth was over. So he changed the terms and he created science, modern science, by saying it was gravity and inertia. Adam Smith took that and he changed it, gave it an economic meaning by competition and self-interest. It's the same, it's love and strife again. And then the final step was applying these ideas to biology. Biology then became a self-contained system. It didn't need God. It was like Laplace when Napoleon asked him where God fit into a system. Laplace said, well, I don't need that hypothesis. Well, this was implicit, and over this period of time, basically what you realize, it became more and more overt, largely through the work of the Huxley family, who were Darwin's big promoters, until finally you reach the point in 10 years ago where we threw off any type of restraint, and we're just going to flat out tell you that God does not exist. And if you think he does, you're an idiot. That was pretty much the tenor of their argument. Of course, you can't prove a negative, so you can't prove that God doesn't exist. There's a lot of browbeating that goes on here and a lot of sleight of hand. And that's what I exposed in this article, which appeared in the October issue of Culture Wars. So to cut to the chase, the only philosopher of the group, Daniel Dennett, makes a statement in this book of his about atheism. And he says, the universe created itself ex nihilo. And then he makes an even more preposterous statement, or out of something very small. Well, this exposes the whole preposterous nature of Darwinism. First of all, it purports to be biology. Okay, biology is not metaphysics, and here they're making these metaphysical cosmological statements that cannot be backed up by biology in any way, shape, or form. Okay, that means, so what we're saying here is This is preposterous. First of all, let's get to the second statement. If it's something very small, Professor, it's still something. Okay, so you haven't explained how it came into existence because it's something's already there. Okay, if we take your first statement seriously, the universe created itself ex nihilo. Well, wait a minute. That means the universe had to exist before it existed. Now, can you explain that to me? Well, no, you can't, because that's impossible. That is logically impossible. And so the whole foundation of Darwinian uh, cosmology collapses in self-contradiction. It's completely bogus. It's completely fraudulent. So I feel as if I'm liberating everyone from a bad dream that has existed for like 100 years now. Okay, they try to get around it by saying, well, they're small increments. This is Dennett's, not Dennett, Dawkins' myth of Mount Improbable. Okay, well, you can get from just little steps. We have a billions of years out there, and you just take little steps, little steps. Well, no, you can't do that, because every time every time you make this argument, you're trying to get from nothing to something, and you can't get there from here. Okay, you can't get there by little steps, and that's your whole argument about atheism is predicated on something that won't get you there. Now, the point here is that when you're talking about beginnings, you have to talk about God if you're talking about a real beginning. They are always fudging the issue. Hitchens said, well, there were light sensitive cells that became the eye. Well, either it sees or it doesn't see. Okay, we're back at the same issue. If you really want to talk about how things begin, you have to get to the philosophical, the metaphysical argument, which is basically the argument about the uncaused cause and the unmoved mover, which is something they don't know about. That Dawkins tries to refute it, but you can't refute what you don't understand, and so he doesn't refute it. So basically, what is that argument? This is the argument. I was in India, and I'm talking at a school in Delhi, and they're 15-year-olds. And I give a little talk, and then the teacher says, are there any questions? And boy stands up, 16-year-old stands up, and he says, can you prove the existence of God? And I said, yes, I can. I said, nothing comes from nothing. There is something. Therefore, there was never nothing. This something could not bring itself into existence, because to do that, it would have to exist before it existed. That's impossible. That cannot happen. So therefore, something else had to bring it into existence. That something is what all men call God. That's the proof. That was what I said to the kid. Now, there is a slightly longer variation that I shouldn't go into. You could say that the universe was created by a demiurge, who was created by another demiurge, who was created by another demiurge. And you could say, okay, the Indians are familiar with this. Their cosmology is basically the semicircle of the earth sitting on the back of 4 elephants, and the 4 elephants are standing on a turtle. And the question is then, what's the turtle standing on? And the answer is, it's turtles all the way down. Type that into Google and you'll get a little description of that whole philosophical argument. Well, it can't be turtles all the way down. It can't be demiurges all the way down. It doesn't work, okay? Ed Fazer has written a book about this topic. He mentions the analogy of the freight train. The caboose is moving. Why is the caboose moving? The caboose is moving because it's attached to a boxcar, and the boxcar is moving. Well, why is the boxcar moving? Well, it's because it's attached to another boxcar. Well, is it boxcars all the way down, just like turtles all the way down? No, because the boxcar cannot move itself. There has to be a locomotive at the end that has within it the principle of motion. At the end of all of this chain of contingent being, there has to be an absolute being, and that absolute being is known as God. but I mean, this is the long version, but it's the same uh, story that I basically told to the Indian boy when I was in Delhi. That's that's the first chapter in my book, a book I'm going to be writing about called the History of Logos and the Logos of History. I'm saying this is the moment in world history where we have basically a global community hooked up through the internet that can say things like they speak a global language, which is called English, which is good at saying things like, how much does that cost? And I'll take 17 of them. I'm saying that there is a deeper language out there, basically the philosophical tradition of the West, beginning with uh, people like Anaxagoras, the pre-Socratics, who came up with the idea of logos and nous as the fundamental principle of the universe. I'm saying in order to have a more sophisticated conversation with Iranians, with Indians, with anybody in the world, you need to have this philosophical foundation and this philosophical vocabulary. And that's what I'm hoping to do with this book.